Formula One is ready to return to our screens, but in the meantime, we will be looking back to the past of the sport and focusing today on the Formula One career of Michael Schumacher. Welcome back to the Grid Talk podcast, everybody. This is episode number 89. Hosting today will be me, George Howson. Join me today, our co-host of the Monkeyseat Podcast, Tom Horrox.
Hiya.
Engineering student Owain Medford.
Hello.
And F1 expert, Alex Booth.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us today on the show, lads. Really do appreciate it. I should mention as well that if whoever's listening or watching this gives us a 5-star review on iTunes, we will give you a shout out at the start of the show. So just bear that in mind. It really does help us out in the rankings as well. And also, we are broadcasting this live on Facebook as usual, so be sure to like the F1 Chronicles Facebook page to see this show go out early. I believe this show will be going out on Wednesday, so if you want to catch it on the Sunday before, just go to the Facebook page and you can see it live on there. So today we're talking about Michael Schumacher, the man who, until very recently, was the most statistically successful Formula One driver of them all. 7 world titles, 91 wins, hundreds of podiums, loads of pole positions as well. But despite all that success, Tom, his Formula One debut came in very strange circumstances, but he definitely shone through in the unusual conditions he found himself making his debut.
Yeah, I mean, thank God for London taxi drivers. You know, Bertrand Gachot just defending himself allegedly and getting put in the clink, and it led to Schumacher being the highest bidder and getting his debut in Belgium in the Jordan 191. Interestingly, that Eddie Jordan didn't want to put him in the car, but he asked him if he'd done the track before, and he said, "Yeah, I've done it before." Turned out he'd only cycled it, but yeah, and qualifying, what was it, 5th, I think it was, or somewhere up there, but certainly ahead of his more experienced teammate. Just a shame that the race only lasted a couple of 100 yards.
Yeah, the 1991 Belgian Grand Prix only lasted a few corners because I believe his clutch burnt out, which was sad to say the least. But he was very quick, as he showed in qualifying, Alex, and that earned him an immediate promotion, if you will, to a bigger team in the sport, to Benetton.
Yeah, I mean, I touched on this on the Leytonstone 1991 show we did a couple of weeks ago. It had been enough to attract the attention of Flavio Briatore, and Bernie Ecclestone was involved as well, because the commercial aspect, a German driver coming through, would not do any harm to Formula One's sponsorships at all. And he ended up in the drive the Benetton Port team for the next Grand Prix in Monza, and immediately set about matching the pace of his illustrious teammate Nelson Piquet, and he would go on to score his first points in that first race with Benetton.
Yeah, I mean, Nelson Piquet was his last season in Formula One. Some people, I think you as well, Alex, said that Michael Schumacher effectively retired Piquet. You know, he was getting on a bit at that point, and yeah, Schumacher continued at Benetton. He got 3 points finishes that season. He got 2 points in Italy for 5th place. Back then, of course, it was only points going to the top 6. Got a point in Portugal and another point in Spain. And Wayne, I remember watching the race in Spain. Not the time, I wasn't around back then, unfortunately, but I remember looking at the highlights of that race, and the talent was there immediately. That was only his 4th race, and he was fighting with Mansell, fighting with Senna in horrible conditions at the Circuit de Catalunya.
Yeah, I think that's just kind of a mark of a great driver, is that they can go in with seemingly very little experience. Experience that you'd expect of a much more experienced driver. And obviously he'd raced before, and just managed to thrive in the same way that we've seen all the best drivers do it, or if they get promoted up to a very good team, they either sort of sink or swim. It tends to be the best teams that have the sort of cars that are the best but are the most difficult to drive. And the fact that you could sort of hang around with the most experienced drivers and not sort of do have the issues that Fisichella had in sort of 2009 when he was promoted up to the Ferrari, I think shows the mark of how good he is, how good he was.
Yeah, he was dropped in the deep end and he very much paddled to safety. He swam in those conditions and it was great to see. So going into 1992, and quite early in the season, he finishes on the podium. He gets his first podium in Mexico 92. Horrible conditions, obviously, because of the terrible surface in the Hermanos Rodriguez circuit back then. And continued to get podiums and, really showing fantastic consistency. He either didn't finish the race because of mechanical issues or, he did crash out in France, I believe, that year. But he eventually got his first win in only his second season, the first time, just a year after his debut, he got it in Spa. And Tom, it was an unbelievable race for him. I mean, the Williams that year was absolutely all conquering, and he beat it. He beat it around Spa of all circuits and in tricky conditions too.
Absolutely, yeah. One of my earliest motorsport memories there. I remember watching that one live as well. I mean, the mind-boggling thing about that season is the Benetton wasn't the quickest car, as you say. The Williams was all conquering, but it wasn't even the second quickest car. Yet Schumacher was third in the World Drivers' Championship with 53 points. It was just a phenomenal effort from him, and just as you say, I think his Benetton years, in my opinion, were in a lot of ways his best years. Just completely raising the bar for fitness and just showing what you can do straight out of the blocks like that. He just changed the standard for young drivers coming in and for Formula One in Germany as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Schumacher was relentless with his fitness. He absolutely was. He pioneered it during that era. And just the consistency of him, Alex. I mean, you just look at how good he was during his first few seasons. I mean, 1993, he either didn't finish the race or he finished on the podium every single race. That's only his second season in the sport, second full season, to finish third in 1992 and then fourth in 1993. It's consistency that a veteran champion should be showing, but he was a relatively rookie at that point.
Yeah, he was. He did show incredible consistency, as you just mentioned in '93. Every single race he finished, he was in the top three, and he had some great drives in '93 as well. He set the fastest lap in a few races, which underlined his speed, and he had some memorable battles with Ayrton Senna, and he probably would have won in Monaco had his engine not failed. He did a great drive in Belgium again the year after his first win, because despite the Benetton's power deficiency compared to the Williams, he did quite a bold move on Prost towards the end of the race and finished second. And it looked like the second win wasn't going to come, but it finally did in Estoril, which he did out of clever time management, really, because he didn't make a pit stop where everybody else did. And it hit him his second career victory and the second benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. 93, another great year for him. But 94 was the year when it went to the next level. Benetton had one of the best cars, if not the best car, especially at the start of the year. And Owain, he just came absolutely out of the blocks. I mean, just 4 wins to start the season, 6 out of the first 7 he won as well. I mean, just the consistency. That was the thing about him. He was just so consistent. Like we see with Hamilton now, he's just so consistent. He's always up there and he's usually winning.
Yeah, I mean, for the races he actually started. Well, so yeah, the races that he wasn't disqualified from or didn't start, it was either second or higher, which is that just puts the mark on it. Like there's no contest there between him and Damon Hill at that point. Even not starting 2 Grand Prix, and still get 4 Grand Prix total out of his run that season, and he still manages to come away with the championship win, which is I think a testament to how dominant he was going to be.
Yeah, there was a lot of controversy though in 1994. We've already covered part of this last year regarding the car itself. We're not going to get too much into that, but we will mention that allegedly there was electronic aids on the car that were not allowed, and they used them, but Benetton were eventually acquitted of that. They were found not guilty of that, so they weren't punished for it. But one thing can't be doubted, though, Tom, and that was Schumacher's incredible speed. And ironically, it's actually one of the races where he finished second in Spain, where he really showed how fast he was. I mean, what was he? He was stuck in 5th gear or 6th gear, I think, for most of the race and still managed to finish second.
Yeah, it's shades of the great man who unfortunately passed away a couple of races before, where Senna did the same thing in Brazil. I think that season, despite the tragic events of the season, Schumacher really arrived as a world star. And we all know about Bernie Ecclestone and how he needs to have his star in Formula One to sell to the television networks. And there was definitely when Senna died, what are we going to do? We've got to bring back Mansell. We got to keep these big stars in because they're box office. But he soon realised that he didn't need to do that because the new star was already there in Michael Schumacher. And despite the this year being the start of the first of his, should we say, kind of more controversial moments in his career, because he did have quite a few of them, and quite a few of them were in this season. You definitely saw that there was a star born in 1994. I think a lot of his opening race results was a lot due to Williams just not being up to speed, and then obviously having to rebuild. There is an alternate universe out there where Ayrton Senna is a 6-time World Drivers' Championship, having won his 6th for Ferrari, and Michael Schumacher never signed for them and has 3 World Championships under his belt. But I think that's a whole nother podcast, that one.
That is a whole nother podcast, and it's something that I've spent probably too many hours kind of hypothesizing what would have happened if Ayrton Senna lived. But yeah, definitely Ayrton Senna tragically passing away contributed to Michael Schumacher's success from 3rd race onward, especially. But take nothing away from Schumacher, it was a dangerous time in the sport. There was some horrific crashes. Obviously, Roland Ratzenberger died. I think Carl Wendlinger had a horrible accident in Monaco. Rubens Barrichello had a horrible accident at San Marino as well. It was a dangerous time, and obviously he came through that. But we will focus on some of the more controversial races in 1994 now, and starting with Britain, Alex. I mean, this one he was disqualified for, but the circumstances around it are just a bit strange. I think he overtook Damon Hill on the parade lap, and just not allowed to do that. Got handed a drive-through penalty and refused to serve it, and then he was kicked out of the race because of it.
Yeah, he did. It was a rule that Damon Hill actually said he didn't even know the rule existed, because Schumacher had actually done the same thing at Interlagos, and it had gone unpunished. And then he overtook Damon Hill on the parade lap at Silverstone, and got punished for it. Although his argument was that the race had actually been restarted again because I think Eddie Irvine and the Jordan, his engine had seized on the wall. Coulthard had stalled on the grid, so they did a restart. Schumacher argued that first one that didn't count. But anyway, and then the Benetton team's protestations was that it took the stewards over 20 minutes to make that decision, where, as we all know now, the rule is that the stewards have 15 minutes to make the decision, and after that it's wiped off. So it kept going round, and the black flag was waved. Schumacher claimed that he couldn't see it because of the sun, and then it finally was brought in on lap 27, held for 5 seconds, and then went off. And he did finish the race second, but then they disqualified him and gave him a 2-race ban, which he appealed, and allowed him to race at his home Grand Prix in Hockenheim. And the ban was brought in after Belgium, which was another race he was disqualified from due to the plank being worn. Benetton said that it would have been better for him to have been banned for Hockenheim because that wasn't a track that suited their car, and he blew up anyway. But that's by the by, because obviously a driver wants to race in his home Grand Prix. But that was where Schumacher's season started to change. Had that not happened, he might have been world champion by Monza or Estoril by September or something like that, because they were really dominant at the time. The cynical part is that Formula One probably needed to do something to avoid a runaway champion, and getting rid of Schumacher for 2 races might have done just that to help it. But that's another argument as well. But we can't really take anything away from Schumacher, though. He drove superbly in 1994 and did deserve the championship.
Yeah, and I think on the whole throughout the entire season, I wouldn't say the Benetton was the best car. I think the Williams was the best car over the whole season. I mean, at the start it wasn't, but I think Benetton eventually.
Second half of the season.
Yeah, I mean, you look at how Schumacher's many teammates that year relatively struggled. I think Verstappen got a podium or something like that, but that was the only driver to really get up there. The Benetton. If you look at the second driver for Benetton, okay, team managed by Flavio Briatore, the second driver probably didn't have that much of a chance, but it was still pretty much the same car. So if you look at how much his teammates struggled that year compared to him, it really does show that he was out driving the car. The other thing as well, Alex, I mean, you mentioned about him being disqualified at Spa, but I believe Benetton argued the plank was too worn because he ran off the circuit, not because they were running the car too low.
Yeah, he made a mistake in the middle of the race, and he did a 360-degree spin and carried on and did go on to win. That was Benetton claimed that had worn the plank down, but that argument they didn't win the argument with the FIA, and Schumacher was stripped of the Belgian Grand Prix win, and then the 2-race ban in force from Silverstone came in, so he missed the Italian and Portuguese Grand Prix. Yeah,
throughout that season, for the most part, Schumacher was relatively unchallenged, but a challenger arose in the form of Damon Hill, Owain, and they had an unbelievable battle at Japan in Suzuka. It was torrential rain, and it was a race that was split up into 2 different parts, and Damon Hill ended up winning on aggregate, but I don't know if you've seen that race, but it was a hell of a spectacle, and just 2 drivers on top form. It was brilliant to see.
I haven't, unfortunately, and it's something I'm going to have to go back and watch because that does sound epic.
It was.
The only other thing I've seen between Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill is, of course, the infamous incident at Australia that after that. But it was probably sort of that the Japanese race, I imagine, built tension for that incident and just sort of pushed it over the edge. A couple of weeks later.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Damon Hill had to win the race in Japan to keep giving a shot of winning the title in Australia. And Tom, I don't know if you watched the Australia. I don't know if you got up early and watched the Australian race at Adelaide that year, but just kind of tell us what the reaction was at the time. What were people thinking? I think one of the commentators more than insinuated that Schumacher used dirty tactics, but what was the kind of reaction like at the time after the race?
Well, yeah, that's one of the ones that was just before I started getting up early. I think that was the last year where I didn't get up early for the yeah. I think that was the reason why I decided, you know what, I'm never missing a race again now. But yeah, no, because unfortunately I knew that he'd won before I watched the race, that one, because I caught it on the news before I watched it. But when you actually saw the event, I know that Damon Hill since has he is that a real bite fist moment of why didn't I just wait? He comes around the corner and sees that Schumacher's in the middle of the track going slowly, thinks, oh, he's just made a mistake. Now's my chance. I've got to pounce. Goes for it. And then Schumacher clearly, I think he's admitted to it now since, but clearly tried to stop him going past at all costs, causing himself to retire from the race and causing enough damage to Hill's car to cause him to retire. And I recently, only last week actually, I was listening to Adrian Newey's autobiography, and he said that he wasn't at that race because he was preparing the car for the next season. And he believes that, having seen the damage on return, that if he'd have been there, he'd have told them it was safe to carry on and Hill would have won the championship, which is,
I never knew that.
Yeah, it was buckled, but it was only going to be under extreme pressure. And basically, if he'd have just taken it easy in the right-hand turns, and then he would have been fine in the left-handers. And he could have just carried on. But so it's just another one of those real fist in mouth moments of, oh, why didn't I just do that? There were so many things that were conspiring against Schumacher winning that championship, and yet he still did.
Yeah, he did. And yeah, that incident, if you haven't seen it, it was Adelaide. It was a tight street circuit, and Hill just didn't see Schumacher because of the walls. He didn't see him go off and hit the wall. He just saw him coming back, and yeah, he thought that he'd have to overtake him. He saw his chance. He went for it, and Schumacher turned in on him, and no action was taken. I'm sure there was some discussions and stuff at the time, but no action was taken, and both drivers retired, and that meant that Schumacher won his first world title. Yeah, a very controversial incident, but not far from the last one in Schumacher's career. But we'll get on to 1995 and a lot more. In a way, a more dominant season and away from Alex. I mean, he wasn't always finishing first or second, but he won the title more clearly. I think he won it with a few races to go rather than at the last race this year. But again, some controversial incidents this year. I think there were several on-track clashes between Schumacher and Hill. I think there was one at Silverstone. There was one at Italy. Belgium as well, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
very aggressive driving.
Yeah, the Belgian one was because he was allegedly weaving in front of Damon Hill and forcing him off the track, and he did actually receive a suspended ban for that. But the other incidents were more Silverstone. Damon Hill tried an ambitious move into Prix, and it didn't pay off. The one at Monza, you could really blame on the back marker. Taki knew he'd been in the way, and Damon Hill was a bit unsighted and just got caught out on his braking, and unfortunately took them both off. But incidents aside, Schumacher probably performed some of his best races in 1995, because that Benetton was not the best car. The Williams was probably the fastest and the most advanced, and certainly the most efficient. Had a couple of reliability issues, but it was still probably the best car. And it was Schumacher's talent that was able to make the difference. And he won 9 races that year, which equaled Nigel Mansell's record from 3 years earlier.
Incredible. I mean, this is the thing. He won so many races, 91, and in slightly shorter seasons than what we see nowadays. I mean, yeah, I remember his battle between himself and John Lacey at Europe. I mean, that was a hell of a race at the Nürburgring. showed great determination just to catch up to him and get past. I mean, yeah, so title number 2 and some incredible drives along the way as well. But Michael Schumacher is definitely best remembered for his time in red, his time at Ferrari, and he moved to Ferrari for 1996, Owain, and the car was not there. I mean, the car we've seen for Ferrari last year in 2020, that was a midfield car. I'd argue in 1996, the car was on that sort of level. It was a midfield car, but he just managed to drag it up and win. And his first win in Spain was just unbelievable. That is where he cemented his reputation as the Rainmeister.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, Ferrari were floundering. I think, what was the last championship they'd won before that? 1986, something like that?
Last driver championship were 82. Wait, no, teams were 82.
Either way, it was a long time, and Ferrari were sort of floundering in that period of Formula One, and to have someone come in and with the help of other people, completely sort of revitalize the team, or at least they'd go on to, and sort of, like you say, put their stamp down as the skill of driving in the rain and doing a rain dance and being the Rainmeister. Sort of, that's where that came from, and did an absolutely excellent job with the tools he had, which were. There can be something to be said for the rain equalising things, but it was an awful car at that point for Ferrari, and to come out and actually get results out of it is again sort of a testament to Schumacher and how good he was.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he won that race in Spain by at least 30 seconds. He was miles ahead of the field. It was awful conditions. If you go back and watch the race, you'll know what I mean. There's no way they'd even run in that nowadays. No chance. So the car was not quite good enough, even in Schumacher's hands, to win the title that year, to challenge for it, really. Still finished 3rd overall. But 1997 was a different story, Tom. And another rivalry, this time between the Williams driver of Jacques Villeneuve. I mean, the strange thing about this season is if I remember correctly, I don't think they shared a podium all season. Ferrari were great at some tracks and Williams were great at other tracks. But it was a fascinating battle between the two.
Yes, I'm not sure about the podium statistic, but something never really occurred to me. But yeah, it was one of my most passionately watched seasons as a youngster, as a young teenager, desperately cheering for Williams and my new hero Jacques Villeneuve at the time. Looking back now, how naive I was. But it was a very, very good season overall, and to go to the last race again, but just to end in that way, but. The last race of the season, the McLaren 1-2 for me was the highlight of the season as a proud Team McLaren member at that time, and seeing them trying to claw their way back up. And ironically, in a season where he came so close to winning his championship, and in the end, obviously Williams getting the championship, for my highlight to be a 1-2 finish for McLaren in the last race is somewhat predictable, but a little bit on the odd side.
I'm not surprised at all, to be honest, but there we go. It was definitely returned to form for McLaren, who would show a lot better pace in the coming years. We'll get onto that shortly. But yeah, 1997, there were some controversial races here for Schumacher, Alex. In particular, the final race at Europe, and it was Villeneuve versus Schumacher for the title. I think Schumacher actually led the championship going into the race. But just kind of describe what happened, because it started as such a strange weekend. I mean, it was at Jerez, which doesn't normally host a race, and 3 drivers ended up qualifying on pole position with the same time.
That's it, yeah. Jacques Villeneuve, Michael Schumacher, and Villeneuve's Williams teammate Heinz-Harald Frentzen, the top 3 were the exact same time. They were only separated by the order in which to set the times. At the start of the race, Villeneuve got too much wheel spin, and Schumacher got the lead. Villeneuve actually dropped to 3rd, but Frentzen had led him through a few laps in. And then it was Villeneuve chasing Schumacher. And then as the race got over half distance, Schumacher's Ferrari suddenly seemed to be going a lot slower. We don't know if he had actually had a problem with a car or a slow puncture or something like that. But Villeneuve was catching him, tried the move into the dry stack corner, and Schumacher saw him. And it certainly appears that he took 2 attempts to turn in, and the second one, he made contact with the side of Villeneuve's car and ended up in the gravel trap. And you could tell Schumacher was clearly flustered, because normally you'd probably be able to just drive out of there, but he actually let the car bob down and he couldn't get back out. And you could see Schumacher looking down the side of the track to see Villeneuve coming through, which of course he did. And he ended up winning the championship. And it was one of the real low points of Schumacher's career, because he was seen as sort of the pantomime villain, if you like, and he was vilified by the press in Germany and in Italy. The Italian press were calling for him to sack from Ferrari because of it, and the FIA stripped him of his points tally for that year. It was a shame, because he had driven very well in 1997. He dominated the wet Monaco Grand Prix, again mastered the rain in Spa, and he'd driven in the wet in France as well and won that race. So it seemed that every time it rained, Schumacher was guaranteed to win. But yeah, it was not his finest hour in Jerez, and Villeneuve ended up claiming his first and only championship.
Yeah, a huge black mark against Michael Schumacher's name in the sport. I mean, unlike 1994, it was a bit more obvious this time, to say the least. I mean, like you said, probably turned in twice on Villeneuve, didn't get the damage that he intended. Villeneuve limped home, and I think third in the end. Yeah, so it was not good for Schumacher. I mean, the guy who had clearly had pace, but he didn't get the championship he wanted, and he tried to do it in some very dodgy means, indeed, some very nefarious means. But there you go. What I think's most fascinating probably about all this, though, is that I think it was Ross Brawn on the Grid podcast said that Schumacher went back in after that incident, went back into the garage, Alex, and he was absolutely convinced that he didn't do anything wrong. He didn't think he turned in on Villeneuve. He was that just wide. He didn't realize he did anything wrong.
I haven't actually listened to that Ross Brawn podcast. I'm going to have to, but I can't believe it, because Schumacher. I don't think Schumacher really ever believed it was wrong, and I mean, we'll probably get onto we're going to get onto 1998. Of course, a lot of people remember the infamous race in Spa where Coulthard was going to let him through, and Schumacher hit him, and of course he saw red and went down to the McLaren garage, determined to stick one on Coulthard, and the McLaren mechanics stopped him. And then the calming colours went on him, and the next race in Monza, they appeared to reconcile. But Coulthard allegedly asked Michael, can you ever remember a time when you were wrong? And Michael went, no.
I can believe that. I can definitely believe that. Yeah, so 1998, Schumacher's big challenge for the title this year was Mika Häkkinen at McLaren. And it was a real ding-dong battle between the two throughout the season, Owain. And what I find interesting, out of all of Michael Schumacher's rivals, he respected Mika Häkkinen. He says that he respected Mika Häkkinen the most. He feared Mika Häkkinen. He was the only one he actually feared. And this was a brilliant battle between the two throughout this year for the title.
Yeah, it was sort of, it was like Rock'em Sock'em Robots, really, wasn't it? Sort of, want to get a couple of points finishes higher, and then go back the other way. The other season, the next few races. It was sort of, I haven't seen too much of it, to be honest. But from what I hear, it's all the way to the end. But I think I think it must have been weighing on him, on Schumacher, coming into, like you say, Spa, when he really just wanted to lamp David Coulthard at that point, and just clearly made a bad decision. Probably was a bit frazzled by the start, because obviously the start was, insane. It was one of those things. I think it's sort of the mental battle that you always hear about between the two drivers. Häkkinen just had it. Normally where Michael would just sort of bury you with his ability to win that mental battle. Häkkinen would manage to withstand that for for 2 seasons in a row.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Häkkinen came out on top in 2 seasons in a row. The next season was not quite as straightforward in a way. Well, you'll see what I mean when we go over it. But yeah, I mean, 98 Spa, we have to talk about this one some more, Tom. I mean, Schumacher was miles clear. He was several seconds a lap faster than everybody else. He was in a different league, and just horrible rain conditions, and went to lap David Coulthard, who had a horrible race in the McLaren. I think the Bridgestone it was the Bridgestone tyres were really struggling at that track in those conditions, and ends up hitting the back of him, losing his wheel. And I was impressed that Schumacher even managed to get it back to the pits. He drove the thing back on 3 wheels.
Yeah, I think he even kept up with David Coulthard, and I mean, David Coulthard didn't have a rear wing, but yeah, I mean, Coulthard's race was insane. He caused the crash at the start where he lost it, hit the barrier coming up on the run towards Eau Rouge, caused a massive pile-up, and then obviously lots of cars having to be repaired. Was it like a 2-hour time delay or something. And then the restart. And then on the restart, Hakkinen spins around and gets his wheel taken off by, I think it was Johnny Herbert. They both retire. I can't remember how many drivers finished in the end in that race. And then for David Coulthard, he was in the gravel as well at the end of the first lap on the first restart. Kept it going just so he could be a back marker for Michael Schumacher. I think that's in hindsight, a very good decision from McLaren to keep him out there when they could have just parked it, because in the end, it completely changed the result and possibly the championship, because that was absolutely nailed on for Michael Schumacher. But I do think it's interesting that at the end of his first career, Michael Schumacher said that probably his most regretful moment of his entire career was that moment when he stormed into Coulthard's garage and was trying to punch him out. He genuinely said that was his most regrettable moment. I think Hill and Villeneuve would have something to say about that, but interesting that he picked that moment as his career low point.
I'm stunned by that, to be honest with you. I would not have chose that as his most regrettable moment, but it was definitely one of them. He was furious after that. David Coulthard actually finished that race, I believe, about 6 laps down. If you ever feel sorry for a Formula One driver, it's that race. I don't know. I don't know how he kept going. He lost his rear wing, but he's still. He actually
finished. He actually was classified 7th.
Oh, just
despite all of that.
I think only about 8 drivers finished that race. Though he must have been near the pack. Oh my god. So from the not so good of Schumacher to the great of Schumacher, we have to mention as well Hungary 1998. Alex, I mean, this is arguably his best drive of all. This summed up Schumacher as well. The odds seemed completely stacked against him, but he just put in, 30 qualifying laps in a row and just stormed home to win the race.
It was fantastic because that year the McLaren was definitely the best car. And going into Hungary, a circuit notoriously difficult for overtaking, the pundits were claiming that it's going to be a McLaren walkover. They'll easily win it. They'll just get the front row and they'll go off into distance, and that'll be an easy 1-2. But Michael Schumacher and Ross Brawn had other ideas. They realised that Schumacher was able to keep pace with the McLarens early on, but he ended up in traffic and switched to a different strategy, which I think it changed from a 2-stop to a 3-stop, so he took less fuel on. Then was able to go quicker in the meantime, and it paid off because he got ahead of the McLarens. And then, Mick Hakkinen's McLaren ended up with a problem, and he dropped all the way down to 6th. But Coulthard was still there, and Schumacher had done all the hard work and not at that incredible pace, gave him the chance to win, and that really put him back into the championship fight. Because in the mid-season '98, certainly at Hockenheim, it wasn't looking that good. The McLaren looked like they stepped up another gear, but then it allowed him to get back into the fight, and it went on until the last race of the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in the showdown in Japan, it was kind of an anticlimax in a way. Schumacher and Hakkinen, I think Schumacher actually got pole, but he ended up stalling on, I think, second parade lap. I think there was 2 stalls and Schumacher was the second staller. Went back to the back of the grid. He absolutely stormed through. I think he overtook about 10 cars on the first lap, but it wasn't to be. Damien Hill, his old rival, ended up holding him up. And then I think he had a problem with, what was it, Alex? I think he had a wheel come off or something.
Yeah, it was the right rear tyre exploded down the straight because just before that, they'd had Esteban Suero and Toro Takagi hit each other in the final chicane. Oh. And it's allegedly that he picked up debris from that crash, and then the tyre exploded, and that was the end of his championship hopes. Because it actually had a chrome helmet fitted for that race with a checkered flag on it, because I think he was so sure he was finally going to do it for Ferrari, but it wasn't to be. But his time would come.
His time would come again, definitely. Yeah, he was well renowned as one of, if not the best driver in the paddock at that time. He just didn't quite have the car to see through a championship. But we'll move on to 1998, and this year for Schumacher was just so unlucky for the guy. He was performing well up until the British Grand Prix, but I think it was on the parade lap or somewhere through the race at Silverstone. He had a brake failure and ran wide, ended up hitting the barriers and broke his leg, and that ended his championship challenge there, Owain. But what I'm really impressed with is he managed to come back after that, his first race back at Malaysia, no less, which is a horrible place to go racing. It's just so hot and humid. And he ended up bossing it. He should have won. He would have won the race in normal circumstances.
Yeah, you'd expect after sort of that length of absence, because I think it's over 3 months or something like that, to come back and and just sort of jump in the car and go and just go qualify, a second quicker than anyone else. It's sort of inhuman, like superhuman type of thing. It's the sort of thing, people complain about Lewis Hamilton, jetting off around the world and having this completely insane schedule and then jumping in the car and doing the same thing. I mean, but this takes it to another level, in my opinion, to be able to come back after that period of time and still, at Malaysia of all places, which, like you say, is quite a hard place to go racing just in the environment. To come and do that is, I mean, it probably helps that I think everyone else had got fit by that point. They realised, oh no, we need to do what this guy's doing, because we'll never compete otherwise. But it was probably his fitness that helped more than anything else, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, kind of reminds me a bit of Cristiano Ronaldo recently, the footballer. After lockdown, he ended up doing fitness tests, and he was actually fitter after lockdown than before he went in it. The guy was that focused on his fitness. He could do that even at home and just go straight back into the car and just nothing had changed. If anything, he got faster. So yeah, his championship challenge was curtailed after Silverstone. He missed a total of 7 races altogether, including Silverstone as well. So he didn't have a chance that season, but he definitely had pace. And 2000, Tom, was the season when Schumacher would win his first title for Ferrari. Ferrari's first drivers' champion in 21 years. And again, there was some brilliant drives during this season as well. Yeah, I mean, it was just great. And it came down to the race in Japan. It was an unbelievable showdown yet again between him and Mika Hakkinen for the title.
The showdown was it in Japan, or was it? I thought it was in Malaysia.
The last race was Malaysia, but the title was in.
Oh, I see. Yeah, sorry. I think I don't have a vast amount of memories from that season, but maybe it's because I was upset that McLaren weren't winning. But the outstanding memory for me was obviously that the Mika Hakkinen overtake in Spa with the three abreast going at the end of the Kemmel Straight. With, I think was it Ricardo Zonta side by side?
That's
just the defensive moves from Schumacher on the few laps prior to that were just right on the edge of what was acceptable, probably slightly over at times as well. But then for Hakkinen to come back and make that overtake, phenomenal. A shame in the end it didn't actually lead to a championship, but it's certainly one of Hakkinen's greatest race wins. But glad for Schumacher that he did finally get that Ferrari championship. That, besides a couple of moments in the past that were just seemed like something was wanted him to not win that championship. You say 1998, the Suzuka debacle, and then 99, the broken leg, and to finally get that championship was well deserved, and what he'd worked so hard for. So good for him.
Absolutely, yeah. And it wasn't easy for him either, though, Alex. I mean, McLaren at times were the fastest car that year. And as well, during the race in Japan, I think Hakkinen overtook him off the line again.
Yeah, Ferrari had caught up to McLaren by 2000. But it was a very much even, I'd say, equal footing. And Schumacher got off to a better start. He won the first 3 races. McLaren was still having reliability problems at the time, although the speed was undeniable. Schumacher had quite a barren mid-season in 2000. I think he went 3 races without scoring a point, and that allowed him to actually lose a championship lead. Hakkinen ended up taking the lead of the World Championship. But then Schumacher brought back with a victory in Monza, and then Hakkinen's engine failure at Indianapolis really hampered Hakkinen's chances of taking 3 consecutive titles, because that really put him with a points disadvantage. They got to Suzuka, and Hakkinen did beat Schumacher off the line, but just almost similar to Hungary 2 years previously. Fantastic pit work and strategy by the Ferrari crew enabled Schumacher to get the job done, because after the final round of pit stops, Schumacher was ahead of Hakkinen, and despite a late challenge from Mika, Schumacher just held on and finally got that 3rd World Championship and Ferrari's first Drivers' Championship for 21 years. But my most outstanding memory of Schumacher in 2000 was we saw a different side to him, because prior to that, it had a reputation of being quite cold and not showing a lot of. It showed a lot of emotions on the podium in terms of being happy, but he didn't really show much of a sort of human element to him. But at the race in Monza, he'd equalled Senna's record of 41 victories, and when that was pointed to him at the press conference, he actually broke down in tears, and it was something that we'd never really thought we'd see. But no, it was a very touching moment, and it's a moment that stands out.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I'm almost in tears thinking about it. It's very emotional. He just bursts out crying, bless him. And yeah, like you said, a lot of emotion for me in the day. He in years prior to that, in 1998 particularly, I think Schumacher congratulated. He was the first one to congratulate Mika Hakkinen on winning the title. Went to him, hung around at the racetrack. Some drivers would have just stormed off and thought, I've not won this title. This is terrible. But he stuck around and congratulated Mika. I think it was very gentlemanly of him. And as well, at Hockenheim that year, 2000, he congratulated Rubens Barrichello on his first win in the sport too. So, yeah, you're right. We saw a different side to him. He'd gone from being the villain to just, I mean, some people still didn't like him, of course, but, we saw a different side to him in 2000. And things definitely kicked on as well for 2001. This was the moment, this is the year when Ferrari and Schumacher just went to another level. I mean, it was just the perfect combination of the car, the team, the driver, just all working in tandem, Owain. I mean, I think this year as well is when he beat Alain Prost's all-time win record too, and on the way to his 4th World Championship.
Yeah, it was the sort of precursor of things to come. Just starting to get more and more dominant, and just he ended up it says here 58 points ahead of Coulthard. In the championship, which is. In those days, it was 10 points for a win, and to end up that far ahead of the second place runner is completely insane. It I think it was sort of the last season where there wasn't some sort of controversy involving Schumacher, to be honest, because there's one after the other for the next few. This is the era I started watching Formula One, and it's honestly it got to the point where it was just you knew that. Once Schumacher was ahead, that was it. That was done. There was almost no point watching the races at that point. That's how good it was. And that hadn't happened yet, but it was coming. You could see it on the cards because they were just so good.
They were so good. They were the Mercedes of the early 2000s. For sure, they were the dominant outfit. I think Lewis Hamilton, ironically, has said that he used to just switch off when Schumacher was ahead in the races. But yeah, I think years later, I think now he probably regrets saying that, to be honest, because of what he's done as well. But at the end of the day, yes, he was in the best car, but he won in not the best car before that for years. So he deserved his success. I mean, yeah, 2001, just, again, dominant, 6 wins ahead. I don't know what point he won the championship, probably by Belgium or Monza, just off the top of my head. But 2002, Tom, this is just on steroids. Like every single race, win or second, apart from Malaysia, where he was took out at the start. Just looking at all these wins, it's incredible. I mean, it's more dominant, I'd argue, than what Lewis Hamilton is now.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, podium finish in every single race of the season, never been matched. I'm not sure it ever will be matched either. It's such a phenomenal statistic. 144 points, pretty much double what his nearest challenger got, which was his teammate. He got nearly 3 times the total of his nearest non-Ferrari challenger, which was Juan Pablo Montoya. Just, as you say, absolutely phenomenal, unprecedented. And I don't think that level of dominance will ever be beaten, because I don't see teams putting so much behind one driver. Because, I mean, you say what you want. I mean, Schumacher won. He was on the podium for the first 3 races, and Barrichello retired from those 3 races. And he did not start in Spain. So he'd pretty much won the championship by the time they got to Monaco. But they would still until he was mathematically certain of winning, they would still prioritize him over Barrichello. And I'm not sure, no matter how dominant a team would be now, I'm not sure they would do that level of favoritism nowadays. I don't think they would say, right, no, you have to back him up until it's mathematically possible. So my opinion, I don't think that's ever going to be matched, that level of dominance.
I think you're possibly right. I mean, the only team I can really see doing that is Ferrari, but Ferrari needs to get back up there for that to happen. It's just incredible. The car had incredible pace, but it always finished. That was the thing. Just the level of reliability was something else. I think as well in that season, Ferrari as a constructor had as many points as all the other constructors combined.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. This is why they changed the point system, I think, for 2003 to include the top 8 as points, just to stop that happening again. But yeah, 2001, 2002, just unbelievable seasons for Schumacher, and he matched Juan Manuel Fangio's all-time record at the time of 5 World Championships, something that I'm sure a lot of people before that, Alex, thought would never happen, but it did.
Yeah, it was a long time coming. I mean, it had been 45 years at the time, and we could argue that maybe Senna might have done it, but it wasn't to be. So yeah, Michael Schumacher finally got it. 2002, he was untouchable, as I've already said. It's a shame that Ferrari had to do the team orders really with Rubens Barrichello in Austria and the clumsy choreographed 1-2 in Indianapolis. That kind of dented really Formula One's image significantly at the time. But at the end of the day, Schumacher and Ferrari were unbeatable, and what they achieved was fantastic.
It was, yeah. Did Ferrari get punished for that in Indianapolis? Did they get a fine or something?
I think they got fined. Well, it's for Austria they got fined because and the drivers were reprimanded as well because Schumacher allowed Barrichello up onto the top step and gave him a choker, but that is disrespecting podium protocol. So they were dressed down for that, and I think they were fined as well. I can't remember the exact figure, but it led to the team orders ban in 2003.
Yeah, team orders out for 2003 because of that. Eventually they come back again and they are allowed now, but that's another story for another podcast. But yeah, 2001 and 2002, very dominant seasons for Schumacher, even by his standards. 2003 though, Owain, was not the same. Not the same script. It was different. There were several drivers going for the championship that year, but again, Schumacher came out on top when the chips were down.
I mean, I would personally say that it was helped significantly. I think that was the year. No, I'm thinking of the wrong time. I was going to say that was the year that Kimi Räikkönen's got a retirement in, both in two races at the Nürburgring. I don't think this is the one that would have lost in the champ. Well, it actually probably would have done because you look at there's 3 retirements for Kimi Räikkönen and he was 2 points away from winning the championship. So potentially he would have actually won it. So it's still true. But yeah, it was sort of a 3-way fight between these are the sort of dominant. It was arguably due to I think it was the F2003 GA or something not being a particularly good, dominant car in comparison. It had certain weaknesses and the McLaren and Williams at the time sort of capitalized on that to really take the fight. To have three drivers within 11 points of each other is sort of unheard of now. At least it's a slightly poor year from Ferrari, but they still eked out and got it on top.
They did, yeah. Another drivers in another constructors championship Ferrari that year. I'm trying to think of what happened with Schumacher that year. His wins were good, obviously. I don't think it was. I might be wrong here, Tom. I don't think there was a huge amount of controversy, unless was that the year that him and Montoya had the battle at San Marino when Schumacher ran in wide, or was that a different year?
Oh, you're asking me there. I'm not sure on that one, to be honest. Maybe our F1 expert might know that.
Alex, over to you.
I think the one you're thinking of is 2004 at Imola, but he did have a collision with Montoya at Nürburgring in 2003, and Schumacher actually came off worse. Montoya did a very brave move actually around the outside at the Dunlop Care, and he left Schumacher enough space, and Schumacher just spun it. I think he panicked and spun, and the marshals were actually pushed him back onto the track, and he did finish the race. But 2003, certainly from my childhood, it was my favourite Formula One season. The racing was brilliant in 2003. I'm going to stick my neck out and say it was probably the one year that Schumacher won the championship where I felt that he probably didn't 100% deserve to. I think I'd have loved to have seen Kimi Räikkönen win that year, really, because he was only in his third year in Formula One with a year-old McLaren and almost won the championship. So that would have been an incredible feat had it actually happened. Schumacher's best performance that year was Imola, because the night before his mother had sadly passed away. He elected to take the start and won the race, which is just that's incredible. I can't ever imagine doing that.
Yeah, that's the focus he had when he was in the car, just fully focused on what was ahead of him. And yeah, massive respect for that. I forgot about that year as well. Yeah, I think he and Ralph shared the podium that year as well. Very emotional for the Schumacher family at that time. But yeah, so 2003, not as good a year because the car was not as good, but that all changed for 2004, Owain. I mean, just looking at the results here, how many races is that? Is that up to Hungary?
I believe it's 13.
13. So won 12 of the first 13 races. The only race he didn't win in that run was in Monaco when he had a crash. I think him and Montoya had a crash behind the safety car. And for me, this summed up Schumacher because he won the first 5 races of the year. He knew he was probably going to win the world title, but he was furious. I think he threw his helmet at like a tool chest or something like that in the pits. He was furious about it, even though he was comfortably winning the championship.
From what I've read about that year in particular, just to focus on the car because it was ridiculous. It was absolutely ridiculous. This was back obviously in the days when you could do free pre-season testing and testing whenever you want. And from what I have heard, they just, they put the car together, focused on the weaknesses of the year before's car, and just completely went to town on it and basically minimized those weaknesses and didn't take away from any of its strengths. And it was, I remember I've read that Rubens Barrichello said it was the first car it was the only car he'd ever driven that at Mugello could take I can't remember the name of the corners now. Oh, that's really embarrassing. But after the first sector, like it was the only corners that he could take the middle sector flat out. Ferrari thought, wow, this is just qualifying pace, and at that point they then did long runs, and that was completely dominant as well. Some more cynical people might say, well, the Williams of that year wasn't so great with the sort of experimental nose that they were trying. That was probably about 10 years too early for them. And McLaren obviously didn't have a great year, and Renault was sort of still up and coming, but not doing great. BAR Honda had problems, but they just completely swept them away. I think I was wrong with the 13 races. It does look like there's more, but it's still such a dominant season. To have runs of 5 and then 7 Grand Prix on the trot as Grand Prix wins is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, people complain that the sport's too much in Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton's favour, but just look at some of the seasons in the past. Look how good he was this year. It was ridiculous. I think he did get 13 wins in total. He got Japan as well. That was just non-consecutive, and he won the title in Hungary 5 races before the season's end, which I think is still a record to this day, isn't it, Tom? I mean, just what was it like? I mean, like you said, when Schumacher was ahead, you just sort of switched off. But really, was it like that? You literally turned up to every week and he was like, he's going to win. Doesn't matter where he starts, what happens, he's going to win.
Yeah, this was the era where I was going through the motions with the Formula. I was just praying for something other than a Schumacher win and a Ferrari 1-2. It was days like Monaco where with Trulli winning and then Barrichello third were just like complete outliers. That just wouldn't happen. But yeah, that car up until this year, or last year rather, I should say, was, I think, the greatest car in Formula One history because it was just so complete, hit the sweet spot of the regulations, and was probably a big reason as to why they changed the tyre rules for the following year to try and peg them back, given that Ferrari had such a strong relationship with Bridgestone, and Bridgestone were making tyres for them. I think and obviously Bridgestone were great at short distance runs. And Schumacher's like 3 and 4 stop races, the way he was just pumping in qualifying lap after qualifying lap on low fuel were like the basis for his victories. And I think quite unfairly, actually, I have to say, the last minute changes to the regulations, granted, did spice things up for 2005, but were a little bit unsporting of the FIA, I think.
Yeah, Ferrari international assistants, some people call them, but not in that instance. They were actively hurting them. 2005. I mean, yeah, it definitely a change in the guard in 2005. Alex, Fernando Alonso emerged as the champion that year. Him and Kimi Raikkonen duking it out. But there were some excellent races for Michael Schumacher that year. In particular, San Marino, 2005, where he and Alonso battled it out for the win. And really, that Ferrari had no right being up there with the Renault for most of the season. It was miles off.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was some element of truth in that the FIA were deliberate. It was an attempt to level the playing field and specifically stop Ferrari domination. Though Ross Brawn contended that Ferrari just simply didn't get it right. Not just the Bridgestone tyres, but the F2005 just simply wasn't as good a car as the previous Ferraris had been. Which is why Schumacher's performance at Imola was fantastic, because I don't think even Ferrari could even understand why they were so high, because at the next race in Spain, they were back down to the lower end of the points again. He actually retired as well. So it's probably just a testament to the talent and the skill of Schumacher. But yeah, that was up to his Mercedes comeback. That was definitely his worst year in Formula One. He had a standout pole position in Hungary, but apart from that, it was not a great season.
It was not, no. And if you're wondering why we've not mentioned his one win that year at Indianapolis for the USA, check out our IndyGate episode. He didn't have much competition that race. That's all I'll say. But that was not his fault. He's got a lot of controversies, Michael Schumacher, but that was absolutely not his fault. He just took advantage of the lack of competition during that one. But in the end, he did still manage to finish third in overall in the Drivers' Championship, which is to his credit. But yeah, moving on to 2006, his last season with Ferrari, Owain. And this was a fantastic battle between two of the sport's all-time great. He had many of these, like I mentioned, with Damon Hill, with Jacques Villeneuve, with Mika Hakkinen. I remember this is the first sort of battle I remember Schumacher and Alonso going for it, and it was a real topsy-turvy one. You didn't know who would win the title in the end.
Yeah, it was a real slog, and I don't know why, but I can't remember if this is the year where Schumacher actually, stalled after getting the fastest time in Monaco.
It was this year, yeah.
Yeah. We've mentioned the controversies. This is another one.
Yeah.
Just that sort of. You always see it. Some drivers do just have that will to win. The rules be damned. And it's a shame because he would started second, and it's the sort of thing he probably could have given Alonso his run for his money, but he just had to do it. Obviously Ferrari were getting sort of back on terms a little bit, but again, it was sort of one way and then the other, and it got to the point, honestly, where if you've seen this footage from Manicourt for qualifying back when we had that very weird sort of qualifying session where they'd send them out and they'd burn fuel and get the fuel back and all that sort of stuff, it didn't exactly do much for Formula One's environmental image at the time, but it was such a slog that they were racing and qualifying, and it's one of them. It's a spectacle that you love to see, but it really sort of typified, I think, the sort of mood at the time, and it was the last that we'd see of what I'd call this era of Schumacher.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like we said, it's his last season before his first retirement. But yeah, I mean, he was great on Manicourt. I think he got 8 wins there, which was, or maybe still is, a record for the same Grand Prix. But yeah, I mean, 2006, obviously, I mean, I remember seeing that at Monaco. I remember watching that in qualifying at Monaco, Tom. It was definitely a what the hell are you doing moment, but it just showed his will to win at any cost, whether it be right or wrong. In this case, definitely wrong. I think he got disqualified from qualifying, ended up starting at the back, but it showed how damn quick he was. Around Monaco, he started at the back and finished 5th around a track where you just can't normally overtake.
Yeah, you're right. It was definitely wrong. It was so blindingly obvious what he was doing. Very, very, very similar to what Nico Rosberg 10 years later.
It was way more obvious than that, though, even.
Yeah, it was it either 9 or 10 years later, Nico Rosberg did a similar thing. But yeah, completely unnecessary, as you say. I mean, coming 5th in that race, despite having been disqualified and sent to the back, just completely unnecessary. I think he potentially would have won the race anyway. He only had to beat Alonso in the race, and given how Ferrari were with their pit stops and strategies, I think they would have stood a very good chance of winning that race, and that race could have potentially cost him the championship. But it didn't in the end for points, but it could have done going into Japan, where he just had if he hadn't retired in Japan, then he could well have gone to the finale and could well have got his final championship. And this was the only season in Formula One history where I was cheering for Schumacher to win the championship.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, it could well have cost him. Another thing that cost him as well, Alex, I think he had a crash in Hungary. He was well down in Hungary. I think he was running absolutely shredded intermediate tires on a dry track, and I think he had a collision with, I can't remember now, someone at the back. Was it a Manor?
No. In Hungary, what it was, he didn't want to give up. He was out on those tyres, as you mentioned, but then he had Pedro de la Rios's McLaren chasing him, and he got him in the chicane. He actually ran over the chicane, and he had to let him go. Then Nick Heidfeld came through either the next lap or a couple of laps later, and he still wouldn't give up, and they actually hit banged wheels, and it broke the track rod on Schumacher's car. So he actually limped back to the pits. He was still actually classified 8th or 7th or 8th in that race, I think, because there weren't that many finishes. I just wanted to add on to the Monaco problem. It was probably, for Schumacher's image, it probably was the worst one in terms of the controversial moments, because the backlash at that weekend that he got from that, just, you could see that it really affected. I don't think he expected such a barrage of criticism from the media and fellow drivers, ex-drivers alike. Keke Rosberg was calling him a cheat and that he should retire and go home, and all sorts, and it really did affect Schumacher, and it's something that if we were able to hear from him, it's probably one thing that it probably definitely would have regretted.
that was something he definitely did wrong too. No doubt about that. But he did announce his retirement, I think, at Monza, obviously driving for an Italian team, had so much success there. He won that weekend too. Now, some people think there's some controversy around, some sort of conspiracy around his retirement. There's a kernel of truth to it because they brought in Kimi Räikkönen the following year for 2007, Owain. But one thing can't be doubted is that Schumacher went out absolutely on the top of his game. I think he had a puncture at the final race in Brazil and went to the back of the field, almost fell a lap down, still managed to come home in 4th place. Just the guy's pace was relentless, even as he was entering his mid-30s.
Yeah, it was. There's a quote out there that's, it's nice to know. It'd be good to know when you're in a golden era before you've left it, and I think that you sort of realised, particularly with, but I think by that point it was known that, Lewis Hamilton was going to be coming in, and he was obviously at that time he was a prodigious talent in GP2, and it was just a case of he was just like, what, it's probably just time to hang up my racing boots and stop, because it's going to get, I feel like by that point he must have been getting tired, physically, as much as he was the fittest person on the grid, and that probably helped to prolong his career for a long time. It was just by that point that he was starting to go off, and I feel like he must have thought, if I leave now, I won't be seen to get worse, sort of thing. At least for his first retirement.
Yeah, he must have been getting tired, and fair play to him. He had an unbelievable career. His first career, 91 wins. Let's read out the stats. Let's get him up here. 91 wins. Right to the top. You can edit this out, editor, if you so please, Reese. 154 podiums in his first career. 68 pole positions. 77 fastest laps. Just unbelievable. And all those records stood for a long time. A lot of them have only been broken very recently. But that was not the end of his time in Formula One. He retired in 2006, like we mentioned. There were rumours about him maybe coming back in 2009 to replace the injured Felipe Massa at Ferrari. He ended up declining. Ferrari ended up getting Luca Badoer in, which was, that was not so good. I'm sure they would have much rather had Michael Schumacher in that car, even an out-of-practice one. But Tom, he came back full-time in 2010 at the ripe old age of 41 for Mercedes-Benz for their re-entry into the sport.
Yeah, and what an absolute anticlimax that was. Taking over the World Championship winning team. I know the Brawn GP car had virtually no updates all season, so it had already fallen behind. It wasn't the quickest car at the end of the season. They had to completely rebuild the team. It was never going to be the quickest car. And I'm actually of the opinion that he was actually better than he came across, but Nico Rosberg was very underrated. And when he was being beaten by Rosberg, people were saying, "Oh God, he's being beaten by Rosberg. He's lost it." And then when Rosberg beats Lewis Hamilton, they say how bad Hamilton was that year. When in reality, no, just Nico Rosberg was that good. I do think, he was definitely on the decline. I do think he did retire too early. If he raced on for 3 more seasons at the time, then I think he probably would have had much more success. As you say, he retired at the top of his game. I feel he was forced out a little bit because Ferrari actively pursued Kimi Räikkönen and couldn't afford to pay them both. He said he wasn't going to race for another team after Ferrari, so he was kind of left with no choice. He was weary from all of the constant practice sessions and everything, but given that then shortly after he retired, Formula One banned in-season testing, he actually wanted to come back. He had agreed to come back to replace Massa, but it was just his neck injury that kept him out. And then he was just like, "Oh, okay, I'll come back next year then." But there was no opening at Ferrari. So Mercedes, the team that brought him into Formula One, brought him back into Formula One. But just unfortunately, the car was not there at the time. And would he have been a match for Nico Rosberg when they finally started winning in 2014? Who knows? But it's just too little too late for him.
I agree with everything you just said there. I remember at the time I was thinking, "Oh, Schumacher, he shouldn't have come back. He's too old." Rosberg, he's a good driver, but he's not a world champion. What do I know? Like we a lot of people thought that at the time. We generally thought, Michael Schumacher is just he was on the downturn. He was 41 years old. He was 43 when he retired the second time as well. And people are saying, "Oh, Kimi Räikkönen, he's way too old." He's 41 now. So to come back after 4 years out of the sport and take it to a future world champion, take it to a future race winner, And not, I mean, yeah, he was beaten by him, but not resoundingly. So I think his comeback is underrated. But obviously, he wasn't helped by the car, Alex. But he did get. There were some great performances in there, but he did get another podium, an emotional podium at Valencia in 2012. One of the few good moments at that track, really.
Yeah, that was a good race, the European Grand Prix of 2012. I agree as well with what Tom said there, and also I think the worst signs that the old magic was still there during his comeback with Mercedes. It was really unlucky actually in 2011. We'll all remember that terrific race at Montreal where Jenson Button went from last to first, and Schumacher was unlucky. He should have been on the podium that day. Unfortunately, he got overtaken by Mark Webber and dropped to fourth. But he put in a strong performance that day. And then in 2011 and 12, certainly 2012, he was more on Rosberg's pace. In 2012, he had a lot of time, a lot of reliability issues, which didn't help him. Because Mercedes would have had a 1-2 finish in Shanghai that year, the year when Rosberg won his first race. And who knows, maybe Schumacher may have got the better of him over the course of the race. And he did actually set the fastest qualifying time at Monaco. And he would have been on pole. But unfortunately, in the previous race, he had a collision with Bruno Senna and was given a grid penalty. But and that again, that was at Monaco. It's a circuit that pole position is as good as winning the race. And the 43-year-old Michael Schumacher went out and stuck it on provisional pole position, which is brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. It was just too inconsistent. But the thing is, you just see what he'd achieved at that point and the car that he was in. And I'd argue as well, something that really hurt him, particularly in 2011 and 12, was the Pirelli tyres. He went through pretty much all of his career knowing that these tyres are hard. They're going to last the entire race if you want them to, or they'll last a long time. You don't have to go soft on them. But Pirelli was a massive change for that. And for lack of a better term, old dogs don't learn new tricks. It must have been very, very difficult for him to adapt.
He never liked the Pirelli tyres. I remember that in a post-race interview, I think it was in 2012, it might have been at Bahrain, and he really was not happy at how quickly the Pirelli tyres were degrading, and drivers the drivers were having to drive within themselves, to conserve the tyres. And Schumacher didn't like that at all. He liked the flat out lights to flag racing, and so I think he started to enjoy it less than he had done, and decided that the time was right to say goodbye for good. But I just wanted to go back, actually, just hinting on what Tom mentioned. I agree with him. I think that had Schumacher not retired at the end of 06 and stayed, I think he might have maybe won a couple more championships in 07 and 08, because at that time the cars were pretty similar, and Ferrari, because in 2007 they'd all gone to Bridgestone tyres, whereas Schumacher and Ferrari were already used to that, so they would have had a bit of an advantage. So that was probably a missed opportunity, but that's they always say F1 is if spelled backward. Maybe in a parallel universe, if he'd not come back to Mercedes, instead carried on at Ferrari and then retired, maybe at the end of 08, he would have had an even better career probably.
I think probably, yeah. I mean, I think 2007, you can argue, would he have done better than what Kimi Räikkönen did? Maybe. Would he have done better than Massa in 2008? Probably, I'd say. So yeah, he definitely had a chance to win some more, but then again, he might have been tired. He might have not had the same energy to do it. He would have been 38, 39 by then in those seasons, so who knows. But the 7-time world champion, he definitely still had it, Owain. I mean, I remember battle between him and Lewis Hamilton in Monza 2011. It was just wheel to wheel, just brilliant. I mean, it was helped by Hamilton having a speed limit too low at the time on his McLaren, but it was still a fantastic defense of his position.
Yeah, we did see. I think in 2010 it was still getting back into it, and to be honest, Mercedes at the time, they by that point, 2011, they weren't focusing so much on the V8 era cars. They'd moved on internally, at least to we had the engine freeze and it was all aerodynamics at that point. But they'd moved on internally to the hybrid cars. But like you say, we did see flashes of brilliance. We saw sort of glimpses of the old Michael. Like you say in 2011, where he just sort of he was outclassing Sebastian Vettel at the time on that in those changing conditions, which he was so used to and so good in. And then again, unfortunately he made a stupid mistake on Bruno Senna, get into the braking zone and completely messed it up, and ruined his chances next week, where of course he'd come to come on pole. So it was just he was very, very good. You know, to come back and still do that at his age is ridiculous. So, you know, like you say, he was helped in that battle by a slow McLaren, but you know, Lewis Hamilton, even with a straight line speed disadvantage, will get past even some of the above average drivers. So to still do that is kind of ridiculous. It makes me wish that we'd seen Hamilton versus Schumacher in 2007, because I think that would have been that would have been it. That would have been the season to end all season, sort of thing.
Yeah, it would have been incredible to see, but unfortunately, we never saw them both challenging for a championship at their peak, at the same time. It never happened. It's one of them what ifs. But something I've not actually mentioned, I think we mentioned before the show, Tom, was Hungary 2010. I mean, this is the thing, Schumacher. Controversy is always around him. He's incredibly quick, but he also does some things that are incredibly stupid. And he did a absolutely moronic maneuver on his old teammate Rubens Barrichello at the Hungaroring that year.
Yeah. I mean, Hungary 2010, just narrowly missing the wall. In fact, I think there was actually slight contact with the wall, and had the wall been a few inches longer, it probably would have been a colossal airplane collision, effectively. And this is the one outstanding thing about Michael Schumacher in that impossible debate of who is the greatest of all time. I'm not going to use the phrase about the farmyard animal because I hate it, but you look at 1994 with Adelaide, 1997 at Jerez, and then forcing Frentzen off the track in Canada, and Britain winning the race in the pits, and obviously then you got the 2006 and 2000 Monaco and 2010 Hungary. Those are the incidents for me that stand out. And I think if Michael Schumacher had won one or two less championships and none of those controversies existed, for me, he would probably be the greatest of all time. But it's those instances that, for me, make that argument plausible that he potentially isn't the best of all time, which is a shame.
I agree. But like you said, because of those incidents, he had more success. So he probably doesn't regret many of them, to be honest. Like we've said, he always believed he was right, like David Coulthard said. So that's the thing. That was part of his character at the end of the day. So yeah, that was and that's as well. You mentioned Silverstone 1998. That's something we don't even talked about. That's another one. Taking his drive-through penalty in the pit lane, and winning the race still. I mean, I don't want to say Lewis Hamilton is controversy-free because he's not. No champion is. But it just seemed like there was always something going on with Schumacher, wasn't there? There's always that kind of doubt around him. It's just, he wouldn't be as successful if he didn't do this or that. So it's a tough one to call. One of the best, without a doubt. The best.
I suppose, in fairness to Schumacher, the Silverstone 98 wasn't really his fault. It was the stewards doing a massive error of judgment with a penalty decision, really. Because they took so long in determining what, the right punishment, that there was a stop-go penalty. But by that time, there was only 2 laps left. And the rules state you've got to serve it within 3 laps, so they were perfectly entitled to come into the pit lane on the final lap.
It was more the fact that he crossed the line before he completed the penalty, so he actually wouldn't have won the race, because Hakkinen would have emerged in front of him had he gone to the end of the pit lane, which is why they did it. I mean, you could say as well that's knowing the rules inside and out and exploiting them. So you could even praise him for that, but I just felt that sometimes he was on just the wrong side slightly too often, which you never really see, or not so much. If it is, it's a genuine mistake when Lewis Hamilton does that.
I was going to say, obviously Ayrton Senna's won just sort of half the number of championships of Michael, and Michael's done, like you say, has a number of controversial incidents. But I've never understand what I think is a double standard between the two. Ayrton did exactly the same thing. I would say, maybe not to the team. I wouldn't say were so complicit in it at that time, but I think those are one and the same. And the way that people hold up Ayrton and sort of look down a little bit on Schumacher for those incidents, and in some ways it's warranted. Like trying to put Barrichello in the wall at Hungary in 2010, yeah, clearly an error in judgment. It's somehow in Michael's brain. Losing a place or losing a position, or a race doesn't compute in any way. And again, if you watch the footage of him, stalling at and making a mistake and stalling at Monaco, it's so black and white that it's you go back and look at them and it's just kind of, what are you doing? But then again, I come back to what I've said. I don't think it computes in his brain to let those things slip. I think Senna and him are one and the same in mindset. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we're going to judge one way, we're going to have to judge the other that way too.
One thing I would say on Ayrton Senna is, if going back to 1990 in Suzuka, when he took Alan Prost off, he did say he was going to do it, and he did it, and he did admit that he did it. Whereas Schumacher, I mean, the driver said, I think it was Jacques Villeneuve said that at I think it was Silverstone, which was the race after Monaco, they were questioning him about Monaco, and Schumacher was just sat there blatantly lying about, is it about what his antics in Monaco and stuff like that. So I think it's from a character aspect really with Senna and Schumacher.
I think it's the time as well. I think, you go back to like the James Hunt years and what you could do in a car in those times, and then when you get to the Senna years and what you can do in those times. And I was saying to George before the podcast, it's a product of the times. What Senna did in his time was what was deemed to be acceptable in those times. And as the social media generation has come along, and what can be accepted and what isn't acceptable, and I think now, if people did what Schumacher did, they would just be expelled from races. And I think if Senna was around a decade later, he would have been labelled as this absolute bad boy as well. So I think it's more of a sign of the generation. Because
I've seen a few races from the 80s and 90s, and some of the moves that we put on and some of the driving, you think, if that was today, not just Senna, but I think everybody looks back at the Mexico race with Nigel Mansell and Gerhard Berger. If you look at that move that Gerhard Berger puts on Nigel Mansell, he pretty much forces him off the track. And I don't think that would be allowed today.
That's the thing, isn't it? It's different eras, different standards, different perceptions over things. Schumacher was most definitely in the wrong on some of them, for sure. But who knows? I mean, maybe if Senna was born 10, 20 years later, he wouldn't have tried those kind of moves because they weren't acceptable. We don't know. We simply don't know. But like I said, we do know that Michael Schumacher is one of the best of all time. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Nobody's going to doubt that. And yeah, the best of that era, the best of the era when he was winning all those championships. Got to give more than a mention as well, just to say, keep fighting Michael as well, because obviously it's been, how many years has it been now? It's been 7 years since his accident skiing France, and not seen him since. But the most important thing is his health, and we just hope, everybody at F1 Chronicle just hopes that he's getting better and that he's well, and that one day we'll be able to see or hear from him again. When that'll be, we don't know. But yeah, we just want to wish him all the best. So hashtag keep fighting Michael. We still see it on Twitter and places like that, and rightfully so. We just wish him all the best. We hope we see him again.
Absolutely.
Right. So I will ask you, Tom, where can we hear and see more of you?
Well, if you want to, and then you can.
If you so choose.
Yeah, you can catch us, the Monkeyseat Podcast, myself and Carl. We do during the season a weekly podcast, which you can find us at Monkeyseat Pod on all the socials and www.monkeyseatpod.com. We have various guests on from time to time. Some of them are reasonably famous, some of them aren't, and we have some interesting and divisive views on motorsport at times.
Yeah. Carl's usually the one that's divisive, but there we go. No, I love you, Carl. Absolutely love the show. Always love listening to it. But yes, if you want to see when we put out our next shows, we're now available on a new service called Verbal, so search up the F1 Grid Talk on there. We're also available on usual platforms: Amazon Music, YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Music, Omni Studio, and Pocket Cast. Just search for the F1 Grid Talk and all of those. Like I mentioned as well, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes and we'll give you a shout out at the start of our next show. We've got a big back catalogue of shows now, over 80 episodes. We've mentioned quite a few of the ones that relate into this show today. The 1991 season we did very recently, focusing on Ayrton Senna. One on the Benetton controversy of 1994, Tiregate in 2005, and there's some other ones that I can't think off the top of my head, but just look at our back catalogue. We have the usual race and qualifying reviews on there as well if you want to check those out. Yeah, if you want to donate to our Patreon as well for better mics and lights and recording equipment, you can do. Just search for the F1 Grid Talk on there. And we'll be back in a week's time to review some of the liveries of some of the 2021 F1 cars. We're getting so close to the start of testing, we're getting so close to the start of the season. It's exciting. McLaren and AlphaTauri have already revealed their cars and their liveries. Alfa Romeo, Red Bull, and a few others, I believe, are revealing theirs this coming week as well. We'll be back on Sunday. Ruby will be hosting that one, and the show will go out on the regular platforms the following Wednesday. So yes, we will see you for that one. And until then, thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye.